the unstoppable chain reaction. 1939. The world held its breath. Diplomatic attempts failed one after the other. Europe no longer lived in the illusion of peace, but in the inevitable tension of war. In the following months, a new, brutal weapon, the Blitzkrieg, would be unleashed on the continent. The fateful, unstoppable chain reaction of history began. From the first shot against Poland, through the shocking fall of France, up to Great Britain's heroic solitary struggle. This is the chronicle of the Second World War, the last summer of peace. Europe held its breath. For months, the demands and aggressive rhetoric of Germany's leader Adolf Hitler had tightened the coil of international tension. Yet in Poland, the air was still filled with the ordinary sounds of late summer, a fragile peace many hoped would hold. In Berlin, the plan for Operation Fall Wiss, Case White, was set. Hitler, driven by the ideology of Lebensraum, had fabricated a pretext for invasion. The date was chosen, the orders were absolute. Total war to the east would begin at dawn. The moment arrived. At 4:45 a.m. on September 1st, 1939, the German battleship Schleswig-Holstein opened fire on the Polish military transit depot at Westerplatte. The roar of the guns shattered the pre-dawn stillness, marking the instant the Second World War began. This was not a slow-moving front. The German tactic of Blitzkrieg lightning war unleashed motorized divisions, tanks, and dive bombers simultaneously. The Polish army, brave but outmatched in equipment, was overwhelmed by the speed and coordination of the attack. In the cities, the sound of air raid sirens became a terrifying new reality. Families rushed to basements, the world above them dissolving into dust and flames. The war was not fought just on battlefields. It targeted the core of Polish civilian life. Acts of incredible resistance sprang up immediately. In the free city of Danzig, Polish postal workers held out against SS and German police forces for 15 hours, a desperate stand of defiance that immediately became a symbol of national courage. Poland fought alone. Britain and France had declared war on Germany 2 days after the invasion, fulfilling their treaty obligations, but their military response was limited. The promised aid, a swift, large-scale offensive, never came. The rapid advance of the German army forced the Polish government and military high command to retreat eastward, hoping to establish a line of defense near the Romanian border to await Allied relief. Then, on September 17th, the second tragedy struck. The Soviet Union invaded from the east, acting on a secret protocol with Germany. With their country attacked from both sides, the last organized Polish resistance was doomed. By the start of October, the fighting was largely over. Poland was partitioned, its independence extinguished. The September campaign ended, but the suffering, the brutal occupation, and the fight for freedom had only just begun. The world was at war. The Northern Watch, the invasion of Denmark and Norway. For months, the war had been a distant rumble, contained by the vast, cold waters of the North Sea. Yet, to Germany's high command, the neutral shield of Scandinavia was an irresistible strategic prize, essential for securing the iron ore supply and breaking the Allied naval blockade. The plan was codenamed Operation Weserübung Weser exercise. It was a simultaneous, unprecedented invasion of two neutral sovereign nations, planned for the darkness before dawn on April 9, 1940. Element of surprise was the core of its cruel genius. In Denmark, the invasion began at 4:15 a.m. German forces crossed the border and landed at multiple ports. Facing an ultimatum that threatened to bomb Copenhagen, and with a small, ill-equipped army, the Danish government chose surrender to save its capital. The sacrifice of sovereignty was immediate and profound. Within hours, Denmark became an occupied territory, model protectorate that served as a vital staging ground for the larger, more difficult conquest of Norway. Norway was different. Though taken by surprise, The Norwegian defense, military and political, was swift and resolute. A German flotilla sailed toward Oslo, planning to capture the king and government, forcing a swift capitulation. South of Oslo, the fortress at Oscarsborg stood sentinel. When the German heavy cruiser Blucher entered the narrow fjord, an aged battery of cannon, commanded by Colonel Berger Eriksson, fired the first salvos. The Blucher was sunk. The sinking delayed the Germans just long enough for the king and his government to escape the capital and begin their long, defiant retreat north. The fate of the nation now rested on a mobile government unwilling to submit. The German envoy, Kurt Brewer, was sent to meet the king and demand surrender. King Haakon VII made his position clear. He would not capitulate to a foreign power, even if it meant the final destruction of his country. The Allied forces arrived belatedly and in insufficient numbers. British, French, and Polish troops fought alongside the Norwegians in a difficult, grinding campaign in the unforgiving terrain. Naval battles raged in the fjords, but the German advantage was too great. By June 10, 1940, the fighting in Norway was largely over. The king and government evacuated to Britain to continue the struggle. Scandinavia was now under the shadow of the Reich, but the fires of political defiance and resistance were already burning bright. Operation Fall Gelb, the 6-week Blitzkrieg. The winter of 1939 faded into spring 1940, the period known as the Phoney War. A tense, unnatural stillness across Western Europe. Everyone waited for the German Schwerpunkt, the main effort. The Allied High Command, still rooted in the doctrine of the last war, was convinced the attack would sweep through the Low Countries, inviting them forward to meet it. On May 10th, the waiting ended. Operation Fall Gelb, Case Yellow, began. German paratroopers descended, and panzers rolled into neutral Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and Belgium. This was the trap. The Allies rushed their best and most mobile forces, including the British Expeditionary Force, BEF, north into Belgium, enacting the Duel defense plan. But the thrust into the Low Countries was merely a feint. The true Schwerpunkt, the sickle cut, plan devised by Manstein, was aimed through the supposedly impassable Ardennes forest. This dense, wooded, hilly terrain was the weakest point, lightly defended by less mobile divisions who believed the terrain was their greatest ally. Within days, General Guderian's panzer divisions had crossed the entire Ardennes and reached the Meuse River at Sedan. They used concentrated air support from the Luftwaffe to shatter the hesitant French defenses and create a Kesselschlacht, a cauldron battle. This swift, decisive crossing of the Meuse was the pivotal moment of the entire campaign. Once across the Meuse, the panzers did not stop to consolidate. They raced west toward the English Channel. Moving faster than the enemy could react, they drove a crushing wedge between the Allied forces committed in the north and the main French army to the south. The new style of warfare, Blitzkrieg, had no existing playbook for defense. The German spearhead reached the coast on May 20th. The best of the Allied forces around, 400,000 men, including the BEF, were now cut off in a rapidly shrinking pocket centered on the Belgian coast. The Allies attempted a counterattack at Arras, but the fast-moving German units proved too flexible and resilient for the disjointed response. Trapped with their backs to the sea, the Allies faced annihilation. For reasons still debated by historians, Hitler halted the panzers outside Dunkirk. This gave the British precious time to launch Operation Dynamo. Hundreds of civilian boats, the iconic little ships, sailed into the harbor and across the channel to evacuate the trapped soldiers. By early June, the northern forces were gone, but the battle was far from over. German forces turned south for Fall Rot, Case Red. The French army, stripped of its best divisions and equipment in the north, was outnumbered and demoralized. The Germans simply bypassed the vast, static concrete defenses of the Maginot Line from the west On June 14th, Paris was declared an open city and fell without a fight. The French government fled south. Prime Minister Reynaud resigned, and a new government, headed by the aged Marshal Philippe Taine, sought an armistice. The devastating campaign, which had collapsed the entire Western Front, had lasted just 6 weeks. The armistice was signed in the very same railway carriage where Germany had signed the surrender in 1918. France was subsequently divided into a German-occupied northern zone and a collaborationist Vichy France in the south. The victory was total and shocking, securing the continent for Germany and leading Britain to stand alone in the fight to come. The Battle of Britain, Duel over the Channel. The summer of 1940, France had fallen and Britain stood alone. Across the narrow channel, Hitler prepared Operation Seelöwe, the invasion of the British Isles. Before a single German boot could touch the shore, the skies had to be cleared. Air superiority was the vital prerequisite. On July 10th, the Luftwaffe, the mighty German Air Force, began its concentrated assault. Under the command of Hermann Göring, the objective was clear: destroy RAF Fighter Command and force Britain to its knees. The battle was fought over 4 phases, beginning with attacks on channel convoys and coastal defenses. Kampf. The crucial advantage for the RAF was the integrated air defense system known as the Dowding system. It linked chain-home radar stations on the coast with ground observers and plotting rooms. This network allowed Air Chief Marshal Sir Hugh Dowding to manage his fighter squadrons with ruthless efficiency. August 13th marked Adlerangriff Eagle attack, the main assault on RAF airfields. Wave after wave of Messerschmitts and bombers hammered the crucial sector airfields in the southeast of England. The goal was to destroy the infrastructure, runways, hangars, and the communication hubs. The pressure on the young pilots of Fighter Command, the few, was relentless. Often flying 4 or 5 sorties a day, they scrambled their Hurricanes and Spitfires to meet the attackers. Though outnumbered, they fought with determination, relying on the radar early warning to gain the necessary altitude. By late August, the RAF was dangerously depleted. Pilots were killed or injured faster than they could be replaced. Airfields like Biggin Hill and Kenley were badly damaged. Fighter Command was nearing the breaking point, but the Luftwaffe failed to recognize how close they were to victory. In a strategic shift, Hitler ordered the targeting of London and other major cities, the Blitz. This pivot, fueled by an earlier accidental RAF bombing of Berlin, was a critical error. It offered a vital reprieve to the battered airfields, allowing them to repair and the exhausted pilots to rest. The RAF used this pause brilliantly. The Dowding system, undamaged by the shift to civilian targets, ensured that the squadrons were quickly moved, reformed, and rearmed. The battle now moved from the airfields to the heart of the nation, providing easier intersection over the capital. September 15th, 1940, became Battle of Britain Day. The Luftwaffe launched 2 massive daylight raids over London, determined to break the British will. The RAF threw every available plane into the fight. The German losses were catastrophic. They could not withstand the defensive wall. The devastating losses of Battle of Britain Day proved the point. Air superiority was not achieved. On September 17th, Hitler postponed Operation Seelöwe indefinitely. The RAF's victory achieved by technology, strategy, and the courage of the few was the first major defeat for the Third Reich and ensured Britain would continue the war. The contested sea, naval war in the Mediterranean. The first salvo, summer 1940. The Mediterranean, a vital artery of empire, became a lethal chessboard. 2 powers, Italy's Regia Marina and Britain's Royal Navy, stood ready to contest its control. For Britain, the prize was Gibraltar and Suez. For Italy, the claim of Mare Nostrum. Admiral Andrew Cunningham, commanding the Mediterranean fleet, faced a superior number of modern Italian battleships. The stage was set for a brutal war of supply and attrition. The supply lines. The true battle lay not just in great fleet engagements, but in the slow, grinding process of protecting convoys. Malta, a tiny, vital bastion in the middle of the sea, was the fulcrum. For the Regia Marina, the objective was North Africa. For the Royal Navy, the survival of Malta and the destruction of the Axis supply lines. Every journey across the central basin was a high-stakes gamble. Taranto, the sword in the dark. On the night of November 11, 1940, the Royal Navy delivered a shock that echoed across the globe. Biplane's obsolete ferry Swordfish, launched from the aircraft carrier Illustrious, flew low over the harbor of Taranto, aiming torpedoes at the heart of the Italian battle fleet. 3 battleships were crippled in the shallow, supposedly safe harbor. The uneasy balance. Taranto stripped the Regia Marina of its numerical advantage, but their large, modern battleships, like the formidable Vittorio Veneto, remained a powerful threat, a fleet in being that constrained the Ardennes. Admiral Inigo Campione sought engagements on his own terms, often retreating when the strategic risk outweighed the potential reward of engaging the whole British fleet. The clash at Tulata, Cape Spartivento. A month after Taranto, the fleets met again while contesting a convoy movement. The short, sharp action on November 27, 1940, saw heavy-caliber duels between cruisers and battleships, with both sides suffering damage. The fleets disengaged without a decisive outcome, the Italians having successfully covered their supply traffic, but both sides acknowledging the brutal firepower deployed. The lure of the trap. In March 1941, German insistence on aggression pressured the Regia Marina toward a larger, riskier operation against British convoys south of Crete. Admiral Angelo Iachino sailed his powerful force, unaware that British intelligence, Ultra, had betrayed his plans to Admiral Cunningham, who prepared to ambush the Italian fleet far from Axis air cover. Matapan, the beginning of the end. The initial daylight air attacks by the Ardennes crippled the new battleship, Vittorio Veneto, and later damaged the heavy cruiser Pola. Thinking the Vittorio Veneto was sinking, the Italian fleet's decision to detach a group of cruisers to assist the stricken Pola proved to be a fatal error, leading them directly into a prepared ambush. The night of slaughter. Under the cover of total darkness, the Royal Navy, masters of night fighting and equipped with radar, annihilated the detached Italian cruiser division. Radar-equipped battleships closed to point-blank range, turning a strategic blunder into a tactical catastrophe. 3 heavy cruisers and 2 destroyers were sunk without a single loss for the British. Enduring siege. Despite Matapan, the war for the Mediterranean continued relentlessly. Axis convoys, though battered, continued to run, and the Royal Navy paid a heavy price in the defense of Crete and the subsequent reinforcement of Malta. The German and Italian air power made the central waters a dangerous, fire-swept place for all surface ships. The balance tips. The losses at Taranto and Matapan, combined with the relentless pressure on supply routes, gradually curtailed the Regia Marina's ability to project power. By the end of 1941, the Royal Navy had secured naval supremacy, ensuring the survival of Malta and contributing decisively to the eventual victory in North Africa. The cost was immense, but the strategic goal control of the Mediterranean was met. The continent has fallen, but the war has only just begun. Britain weathered the storm, but the Nazi power stands at its peak. Hitler's next ambitious move points east, towards the Soviet Union. Meanwhile, the sands of North Africa become the stage for a clash of military geniuses, where the fate of Rommel and the Allies meets. The true, brutal turning points of World War II are yet to come. Subscribe so you don't miss the next part.